Good evening. It's already a minute after 7, so we're already on Athens time, 1 minute past the hour, but we want to go ahead and get started because I know you want to hear from our special guest, and we want to make sure we save some time for you to ask questions. So good evening, welcome, and thank you for being here. I'm Nerissa Young, an associate professor in the E.W. Scripps School of Journalism. I am that person to remind you to please silence your cell phones. We are recording tonight's program, so please motion for me when we get to Q&A, and I will bring the microphone to you because we want to capture your question on the recording. If you did not get a program bookmark, please see me. We have plenty, and we left room on the back if you want to get an autograph. Finally, a reception will follow downstairs, and you are invited. Thank you to Andrew Logan and the Rivada Foundation, operated by his family, for making this event possible. The Rivada Foundation supports arts and social justice causes in Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Southeast Ohio. Andrew is the founder of Helicopters of DC, a grassroots community transparency and accountability organization that relies on the First Amendment to hold military helicopter operators accountable when flying over the nation's capital. He speaks about the program at cybersecurity and open source intelligence conferences. Please stand, Andrew, so we can thank you and your family. Andrew and Tyler Weymouth, for whom this series is named, are both OU graduates who had never met until both were working at the Newseum in Washington, D.C. Tyler worked at the Athena as a projectionist while working on his degree here. Within 2 years of being hired at the Newseum, he was promoted to broadcast engineer. Andrew joined the Newseum as a technical operations specialist. There, the Bobcats formed their friendship. Sadly, Tyler died in July 2014 from a metastatic melanoma. He was an avid Boston sports fan and fiercely loyal to the OU Bobcat basketball team, traveling in 2012 for the team's Sweet 16 appearance. Andrew said, and I quote, "Tyler would have been glad tonight's program won't conflict with anyone's March Madness viewing." We are honored to have Tyler's parents with us tonight from Boston, Jim and Joan Weymouth. Please stand. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your son with us. It is my privilege and honor to introduce my boss, Dr. Edith Deschel, the director of the E.W. Scripps School of Journalism. Dr. D, as she is known, is a fearless, tireless advocate and ally for our school and its faculty, students, and alumni, and the First Amendment. She'll conduct the interview with our guest speaker. Piano tuner, union employee, emergency room nurse, unruly teenager. That last description of our guest speaker is why she's here tonight. Mary Beth Tinker joined her older brother, John, his friend, Christopher Eckhart, and her younger sister, Hope, and brother, Paul, in wearing black armbands to their schools to call for a Christmas truce in the Vietnam War and to mourn those who had died in the conflict. On December 16, 1965, Christopher and Mary Beth were the first to wear black strips of fabric to school and were sent home on suspension after being told they could not return unless they did so without the armbands. After 4 years of litigation, the U.S. Supreme Court agreed with the students in its 1969 majority opinion written by Justice Abe Fortas. 3 excerpts from that opinion are as relevant today as they were then. First Amendment rights applied in light of the special characteristics of the school environment are available to teachers and students. It can hardly be argued that either students or teachers shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. This has been the unmistakable holding of this court for almost 50 years. In our system, state-operated schools may not be enclaves of totalitarianism. School officials do not possess absolute authority over their students. Students in school, as well as out of school, are persons under our Constitution. Under our Constitution, free speech is not a right that is given only to be so circumscribed that it exists in principle, but not in fact. Freedom of expression would not truly exist if the right could be exercised only in an area that a benevolent government has provided as a safe haven for crackpots. The Constitution says that Congress and the states may not abridge the right to free speech. This provision means what it says. Thank you, Justice Fortas, and thank you, Mary Beth Tinker. So to the description of Mary Beth Tinker, I add First Amendment pioneer. It's my privilege and honor to ask you to join me in welcoming Mary Beth Tinker back to Ohio University.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nerissa. And thank you, Dr. Deschel, and to Andrew Logan and the Weymouths, and to all of you students and faculty and everyone here at Ohio University who made this possible. I am so happy to be here with all of you celebrating the First Amendment. And what a way to celebrate Tyler's life and his love of Ohio University than to celebrate the First Amendment, because he loved the First Amendment and he loved being here at the school. So I am so honored to be part of celebrating his life and the First Amendment. Now, speaking of the First Amendment, just to get started and to get things going, we're going to have a little celebration of the First Amendment. Let me see some students who'd like to help me out. Come on, I need 5 students. Okay, come on, Alan. Now, which right of the First Amendment would you like to celebrate?
I'll go petition.
Petition? Okay, help me out here. Now, when you get home tonight, you can check and see if your family knows these, because only 2% of Americans do. Okay, now which one would you like to pick, my dear? Okay, you speak. Come on up. And okay, so this is Allie. Now tell me when your name, my dear. Carolyn is a First Amendment freedom fighter there. She's a journalist. I love journalism, the free press. Okay, and help me out here, my dear.
I write. Yes.
Okay, and are you going to introduce yourself to everyone? Now stand up here. Your work is not finished.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, and which one are you picking, my dear?
I know, right?
Tell me,
I'm doing too
tell
many
us
things
your
at
name
once.
again.
I wasn't sure.
Go for it. You believe. You have your own beliefs and your religious beliefs, whatever they are. And my dear, what is your name?
My name is Darcy.
Darcy, I am so glad that you all, come on up here. Okay, so here it is, people. The First Amendment, only 2% of Americans know all these rights. So now you can review them and review them with your friends and family tonight. So thanks, and here's to the First Amendment, everybody. Yeah. Okay, people, thank you. And wear them with pride in the First Amendment. And I hope you keep speaking up, and I know you will. Thank you for that little review of the First Amendment. Yes, I found that the First Amendment is, thank you, dear. It's, oh yeah, okay. It's kind of like your muscles. I'm actually a nurse, but I believe that the First Amendment is like your muscles. If you don't use them, you could lose them. So we have to always practice our right. Right, students? Yes. And others, everyone, thank you.
Yeah. Well, happy Wednesday. Thank you. I hope everyone's well. I'm really glad to see everyone. I see former students, current students, colleagues, community members, retired colleagues, current colleagues. So it's really an honor to be here tonight. And I feel like it's just like a reunion, because I met Mary Beth in 2014. And it's just, and I was excited because she sent me an invite because she wanted to follow me on LinkedIn. And I'm going, really? So I thought that was pretty cool. But we're here to hear from her today. And my first question for you is, well, before we get started, thank you, Narisa. Narisa is, every event we've had in the School of Journalism since I've become director, Narisa was behind it. She's the one-person committee, and she's put this event together, and it wouldn't have happened without her attention to detail and her love for her students, our students, and being an advocate for free speech rights. So just want to thank you. So the first question, your father was a Methodist minister and with an acute social conscience. Tell us about the events leading up to the day you wore the black armband to school.
Well, thank you, Dr. D. Well, yes, my father was a Methodist minister and raised in the church, and so was my mother. Well, she went to Catholic schools also in Corpus Christi, Texas, where she grew up. But they both believed that you should put your values into action. And if you say you believe in a more loving world and a more fair world, which is really the heart of all religions, love, as a high school student reminded me recently when I was speaking in Illinois, he said, "Could you please talk about love more?" And so I said, yes, I will try to talk about love more. So I'm going to talk about love tonight. And that's how I was raised, that religious belief is about love, and you should put that into action. And so my father and mother, well, it was called the social gospel. Now, some people say that there's a preacher actually in North Carolina named William Barber. Maybe some of you have heard of him. He says all gospel is social gospel. You're always supposed to put your religious views and values into action. That's what it's all about. Well, my parents really believed that. So my father, when I was about 5 years old, I was just turning 5, there was a swimming pool in town, in a little small town where we lived in Iowa, Atlantic, Iowa, and it would not allow black families. In fact, anybody who wasn't white could not swim there. So some of the kids at our church there asked my father if he would go up to the swimming pool and try to change that with them. And that's the action that kids like to take. Young people like to take action. So he said, okay, I'll go with you and we'll try to change that. So they went up to the swimming pool, and they said that wasn't fair. That wasn't very loving. It was probably illegal too, even at that time. And the people at the swimming pool said what a lot of people say, well, that's the way it's always been. I hate when that happens. So they didn't give up though. They kept working on that, and that was changed all over the country. It wasn't just changed. It happened because people used their rights, and they used their First Amendment rights, and they saw something that was wrong, that was unfair, that didn't follow along with the ideals of our country, and they spoke up about it and got it changed. So that's how I was raised. And as a result of doing that, my father was removed from that church. Well, removed. Some people call that fired. But he was put out of that church in Atlantic, Iowa. And I went to visit and talk to some high school kids there as part of my Tinker tour. And it's a small town. And yes, the swimming pool does allow everyone. And that church is still there. I saw that church. But we had to move out of Atlantic, Iowa. And we moved up to Des Moines, Iowa then, where he had another church, a Methodist church also, and he started preaching there. But that's the way I was raised. You're supposed to speak up about these things. So it was just a way of life. And it was also mighty times, like now, as a student at American University told me, these are mighty times we're living in. And I thought, yeah, that's the kind of times I was raised in also, mighty times, with a lot of decisions to be made about our country and our world. So that's how I was raised.
Okay, so you wore the black armband, you went to school, you got suspended. And so how did the American Civil Liberties Union join with your father to help you with this lawsuit?
Yes, well, in 1963, there was another situation where we wore black armbands first. When we got suspended, it was 1965. But in 1963,
white supremacists in Birmingham, Alabama bombed a church where the Birmingham Children's Crusade had been active. The Birmingham Children's Crusade was 2,000 black students who spoke up for racial justice. I'm sure some of you have heard about the Birmingham children. So the white supremacists, the Ku Klux Klan, to punish the children, they bombed their headquarters, which was the 16th Street Baptist Church, right on Sunday morning, knowing the kids would be at church. And 4 little girls were killed, Cynthia, Addie Mae, Carol, and Denise. And they were about the same ages as me and my sisters. They were 11 to 14 years old. And so then the writer James Baldwin and a man named Bayard Rustin, he was a leader in the civil rights movement, they said what we should do is we should wear black armbands all over the country and have memorial services for these little girls. And so that's what we did. In Iowa, we wore black armbands, and that was the first time that we heard about black armbands. But we didn't do it for the Vietnam War that time. But then a couple of years later, as the Vietnam War was escalating, and the Gulf of Tonkin resolution had been passed in 1964, then we were getting really sad just seeing war on the news all the time. And I know there are a lot of sad people out here right now tonight seeing war on the news all the time and what's going on in Gaza, Israel, and Russia, Ukraine, just constant war. I was thinking back, the whole time I've been alive, there's been some kind of war that the U.S. has been involved with. It seems like all the time. But we were really getting sad about that, and it was Christmas time in 1965 then, and my mom would write a Christmas letter and tell everybody what had happened that year, and then people would pass out cards saying peace on earth. And as I was telling some students earlier today, we just thought that was terrible because we're supposed to send cards that say peace on earth while the adults were busy bombing and having war and killing and shooting and killing. And we said, these adults, that is not right. They should stop that. And that's the power of young people. You see through hypocrisy. And we said, we should, say something about that. It's not right this Christmas. And so, because as I said, at the heart of all religions is love and really peace too. So we decided to wear black armbands again that year. And there were about 50 kids that were going to do it. But the principals heard about the idea. Actually through the school newspaper. Yeah, all you journalists can appreciate that. It was an article that a boy named Ross Peterson wrote for the Roosevelt High School newspaper. And so they had prior review. So, well, probably everybody had prior review then. But so the principal learned about it, and they called a hasty meeting and decided, oh, no, we're not going to let those kids wear those black armbands. That's way too controversial. This is also a case about controversy. And so they made a rule against the black armbands, which was kind of ironic because they allowed black armbands if you were sad about the football game. You could wear, that'd be okay, kids. Yeah, you can wear one then, yeah. But no, war, no. You kids can't talk about that. But we said, we have to talk about this. It's what's going on in our lives and in the world. You see, because there's a disrespect for youth, for young people. And some adults think they get to decide what is important to young people, and they get to decide what young people talk about. I know you don't feel that way.
Not me.
But that's what they wanted to say. Oh, we get to decide what you kids talk about. So that's what happened, and I was really shy and scared, and I wasn't sure what to do about it.
Well, as those who've taken comm law from me know, it takes a while for a lawsuit to make its way through the judicial system. It takes a while. So while this lawsuit, this Tinker versus Des Moines lawsuit is making its way from trial court and appellate court, you still have to go to school. You didn't stay suspended forever. So what was it like being a teenager as this court case was making its way up to eventually the United States Supreme Court?
Well, it's funny you say that about how we had to go to school and we couldn't just wear our armbands and get suspended, because that's exactly what our lawyer told us. you have to go back to school. And the lawyer was from the American Civil Liberties Union. The ACLU has been around for over 100 years, and they're all about your First Amendment rights and your rights. And they thought that should extend to young people too. And so they said, it isn't fair. These kids didn't hurt anybody. And so our young lawyer, he had just graduated from Drake Law School, and he was a wonderful man, Dan Johnston. And he said, well, you kids are going to have to go back to school without those armbands, or else you're just going to get suspended every day. So we couldn't wear our armbands, so guess what we did? We wore all black clothes for the rest of the semester. Yeah, and that's what, there's always a way to get your message across. But we went back to school, and it was very nerve-wracking, to put it mildly, because I was such a shy kid and very nervous, and I didn't want to be, in the front on the paper, in the paper, and having people pay attention to me at all. In a way, I'm the completely wrong person for this whole thing. But sometimes you have to step up, and that's what I learned. So I just stepped up and started speaking more about it, and it got easier and easier, but it was very nerve-wracking. I was very shy and scared, especially when the haters came around, the mean people. Well, I don't know if I'd call them haters, but they were kind of crazy because they would throw red paint at our house and ask us, say that we were communists. My mom would say, we're not communists, we're Methodists. And my dad, he didn't even think we should wear the armbands, because he said, now the principals, they have a hard job. My dad was kind of conservative in that way. Yeah, all you principals out here, I know Jim Weymouth is here. But he said, no, these principals don't have an easy job, and you should really follow the rules and do what they say. But you see, kids are so persuasive. Yes, I do believe that. And we see that all the time. So we said, Dad, look how you taught us. You're supposed to speak up about things. You even lost your job because of the swimming pool. And we threw it right back at him. We said, Dad, come on. You said we were supposed to follow our conscience. And so we brought him over to our side. It wasn't really that hard, though, I have to admit.
So at what point did you realize that this was a really big deal? This lawsuit was a really big deal for the First Amendment in journalism.
It took me a while to realize that this was a really big deal, because I was pretty clueless, really, in so many ways, as a teenager and as an adult. But I think I first realized that it was a really big deal when I was in nursing school. And of course, I was studying at the last minute that night before the test, you know what I'm talking about. And so I was busily cramming for my test. And what do I see in my nursing school book but our case? Tinker versus Des Moines is in my nursing book. And I couldn't believe it. I said, what's that doing? And then I found out, yes, nurses learn about this case because it has to do with children's rights. And that's when I learned that law students learn about it, and teachers learn about it, and principals learn about it, and journalists and journalism directors learn about it. Sometimes they may not want to, but that's when I think I realized that it was a bigger deal than I knew.
Okay. So when we first met, you were doing the Tinker Tour, and you've been doing this Tinker Tour for years. Are you still doing this type of tour? And what's it like doing these tours?
Yes, well, I was working as a nurse then, mostly with children and teenagers. I started as an EMT, actually, an emergency medical technician. And then I was working in some emergency rooms and on hospital floors, in clinics, in hospitals. And once I started at community college. I went to 2 or 3 community colleges, actually 3. And then I just couldn't stop going to school. I just enjoyed it so much. So I went on, I kept learning more about healthcare and nursing, and I ended up with a degree in public health also, as well as nursing. So I was working with kids a lot, and I started to see how unfair it is in our society for young people. I was taking care of kids that had asthma because why? The polluters had been allowed to do anything they felt like. And kids were drinking water that had lead in it. Well, lead is actually a neurotoxin. It's toxic to your brain for a long, long time, maybe forever. And I was taking care of these kids that we had to do chelation therapy because the polluters had allowed lead to get in the water. And I was taking care of kids that were homeless, kids who got shot. That was a lot of the students I took care of had been shot because I was a trauma nurse. Kids that were in car crashes, kids that were, having all kinds of issues. And I said, wow, this is not fair. Why do we have a society where young people are going through all of this stress? And then I started learning about all the other things that young people are really concerned, the climate, the just all the issues. And I said, well, maybe I better leave the hospital and just spend all my time encouraging young people to use their First Amendment rights and tell them stories about all the kids through history who have done that, and including our story. But there are so many others through history who have stood up and spoken up and used their rights, including the Birmingham children and many others who inspired me. And I thought, maybe I can inspire young people to speak up and change these things that need to be changed.
So are you still doing the tours?
Yes, so I left the hospital about 10 years ago, and I traveled around the country with a lawyer from the Student Press Law Center. And it was about journalism, it was about the First Amendment, and we had an RV that was like 29 feet long, decorated in hot pink, with balloons painted on the outside. Well, everyone had a right of the First Amendment. And it said free speech for students, and then free press, free speech. The right to assemble, petition, the right to have your own religion. And we traveled around. We went to over 100 schools, teachers' conferences, conventions, and we had a great time. Sometimes we parked the van in, Walmart parking lots, and we parked in campgrounds. We slept in the RV. We did all kinds of things. Mike and I, and by the way, it wasn't a romantic relationship. I just want to get that clear. But yeah, we had a really good time with the Tinker Tour. And then after that, I decided to just keep it up, but not with the van. So then I just started speaking with students on my own and going around. And he went back to working for the Student Press Law Center. And then when COVID hit, I started doing it all virtually. So now I speak with students almost every day around the country on some virtual platform or other, classes all over the country. Yesterday I was with a lot of students in New York because they had tuned in from different classes, and we were speaking about all of this, the First Amendment, the things that they are concerned about. And on our Tinker Tour, we always ask students also, so what are you speaking up about? And I want you all to think about that right now, because I'm going to be asking you that later. Tell me the things you're speaking up about, too.
So how many students do you think you've spoken to over the years?
How many students? Thousands and thousands and thousands. The biggest audience I had was with the Michigan High School Press Association. I think that was 9,000 kids right there for that one. But many, many students. And I am so glad to be with all of you tonight speaking about these issues, because they're so important in our world and in our communities. It's so important for everyone to speak up, youth, but people of all ages, to speak up, know your rights, and use them.
So what are a couple of examples of meaningful interactions you've had during your tour?
Well, I had a couple of very meaningful interactions today, one at the comm law class that you teach, and that was very interesting when students came up afterwards and we were talking about, the importance of the First Amendment and some of the issues going on right here at Ohio University. We have the diversity scholarship controversies. We have, the vice president of the student government. There are various, controversies always wherever I talk with students. There are things going on right there. And so that was very memorable. And also speaking at Nerissa's trauma journalism class was very interesting, because who knew there was such a thing as trauma journalism? And I think it's very rare for a journalism school to have such a class, so you all are very lucky to do that. But I had very, amazing, interesting experience. And also last night, the Society of Professional Journalism, the students I got to meet last night who made a statement, actually, and published they're taking action about the diversity scholarships. And I always like to hear when students are taking action. But there's so many, interesting times and very touching times that I've had with teachers telling me, just keep doing what you're doing, and it means so much to our students. And I have little fifth graders writing to me and saying, I was so scared when I tried to speak up, but now you're making me think I should do more. And I have even a coloring book that we made that has true stories of kids who speak up about all different things. And it's got kids who speak up about animal rights and disability rights and March for Our Lives, Black Lives Matter, all kinds of things. So there's been so many experiences. I'm thinking of one special experience, though, that was a huge auditorium in a high school in Bentonville, Arkansas. And they had an upstairs balcony and the downstairs, the whole thing was filled to the brink. And as they introduced me, they said, now in the front row, we've got some of our school board members here too. So I thought, oh yeah, this is going to get interesting because, amazingly, a lot of school board members do want young people to have a voice. So I didn't necessarily think that was good, but I was a little wondering what it's going to be like. Okay, so then during the program, one of the students asked, when it's time for questions, and all the students were lined up in the aisle, there was a microphone and everything, and one of the students said, well, what about gay rights? And I thought, oh, this is going to get interesting and controversial. So I said, well, actually, I myself am gay. And I was thinking, I hope this goes. And so the entire auditorium stood up and started clapping, including the school board members. That was one of the most memorable experiences I've ever had in my life. And I said, now you're going to make me cry. I really felt that way.
So what do you want today's students to know as a result of your experience following this lawsuit in this landmark Tinker versus Des Moines Supreme Court decision?
Well, I want all of you students to know that it's a good way of life to notice things that are not fair, that need changing, and then take some action and join up with others. Whatever your issue is, I talk to students who say, we can't wear, sleeveless shirts at the school. And I was like, well, let's see what we can do about that. What are you going to do about it? Whatever your issue is, and I know there are so many issues that students are speaking up about. Join up with others. Maybe you can find some who are already working on that. And I know a lot of you already are doing that. And that it's a good way of life. You don't always win. Usually I don't win, the things I speak up about. I speak up for peace, and you can see how well that's going. But it's still a good way of life. And you get to, it's meaningful. Some days it's even fun. And I always tell students, try to have some fun when you're doing this too. There were students in Rhode Island, and they were sick of all the tests all the time. So they dressed up like guinea pigs and rats. And they went off and they testified at their state legislature, and they said, we're not your guinea pigs. Stop testing us all the time. And so, yeah, you can have some fun while you're doing this too. And the best part is you get to meet lots of really wonderful, interesting people, like I'm meeting all of you tonight.
Very good. Those again, I have a slide. My VisCom students, they have to forgive me because they know that is not my gift, creating slides. I do the best I can, but that's not my gift. But I I'm using one of your quotes the last time you were here, and you mentioned it, talking about your First Amendment rights. It's like your muscles. If you don't use them, you're going to lose them. And so that would be a takeaway from what you've already talked about. To kind of wrap this up and open it up for questions for everyone else, is that, it's real easy to say the First Amendment is great when all of us are saying things that we all agree with. The true test of the First Amendment is when you start saying something that someone else disagrees with so much that they try to silence you. And if you passively accept it, and you stay quiet because someone said you're not supposed to say that, then you start losing your rights. Once you give them away, you're not going to get them back. And so at this point, I think Professor Young wants to open it up for questions from the audience. And I'll be quiet. Thank you.
Don't ever be quiet, Dr. D. We want to hear what you have to say because you have great things to say.
All right, we want to give you an opportunity to engage with Mary Beth. But first, before we go further, thank you to Dean Scott Titsworth for being here. Scott, if you want to wave to everybody, we appreciate that support. And before I forget, I want to give a plug. If you've enjoyed this program so far, our next big event is April the 17th, screening the award-winning documentary Bad Press at the Athena at 7 p.m. That's April 17th at 7 p.m. It is about indigenous journalists trying to exercise their First Amendment free press and free speech rights. And one of the producers, Rebecca Lansbury, will be here for a post-film discussion. So please mark that on your calendars and look for that on social media because that will be, we'll be talking about that soon. But we want to keep this momentum going. So if you have a question, I'll do Oprah and come to you. Okay, just a moment. And please tell us your name and then ask your question. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry for the confusion. So my name is Amish, and I'm a doctoral student at the Patton College. I'm kind of interested in how does First Amendment look like for international students who are not U.S. citizens? I mean, there's a lot of confusion about how does it play into somebody who has not had a visa and who is on an F1 visa. I'm sure you're aware of what F1 visa is. So how does First Amendment look like? I mean, yeah.
Thank you for coming, Amish. It's so good to see you. And the First Amendment covers everyone in the country. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but it covers everyone. So if you're in the country, you should be covered by the First Amendment, as far as I understand. Now, I know there is discrimination, and there are issues having to do. I'm very involved with UDC. I live in Washington, D.C., the University of D.C. And some of the students, international students, wanted to speak up about an issue on campus, and they were told, oh, no, you can't do that because of your visa. But I said, I don't believe that that is really right. But as I said, I'm not a lawyer. What do you think about it, Amish? Is there a problem? Do you feel like you can't speak up and use your First Amendment rights?
From my personal experience, I would say there's a degree of censorship surrounding students who are not U.S. citizens, and there's a lot of suspicion around that. And we've had students being called out on different campuses across this country for speaking about things that are currently happening around the world, especially in the Middle East. So, yeah, I was just curious about that.
Yeah, you're speaking about what's happening in Gaza?
Oh, yes, I am.
And Palestinian rights? Yes, I have very...
So I didn't directly say Palestine, I just said Middle East.
Yeah, well, I'm
speaks a
saying
lot about the kind of
Palestine.
censorship.
I'm saying Palestinian rights because I have very strong feelings about that, and I've been speaking out about it myself also because, yes, of course, what happened on October 7th was bad and wrong with the attack on Israel. However, the response has been horrible, and the possible plausible genocide in Gaza is something that I think all Americans and anyone who's here should be speaking up about. And people all around the world are speaking up about that. It's been ruled a plausible genocide by the International Court of Justice. So I feel very strongly about that. As a person who cares about children's rights, the children in Gaza also have rights. And I'm a trauma nurse, and there have been almost 1,000 children there who have had amputations of one or both legs. And this is with our tax money that this is all going on. So I feel very, very strongly about that. So I'm glad that you mentioned that issue, Amish, because I do believe we should all speak up about that issue. And is it controversial? Yes, but that's what this case is about. I would be a hypocrite if I talk about the First Amendment and then I censor myself when it comes to speaking about something that I feel very, very strongly about. So thank you.
I'm also wondering at the same time, how would the American justice system respond if some bobcats decide to wear black armbands and walk around the campus to protest against Gaza?
I don't know. Maybe some bobcats might want to try that, wearing some black armbands and walking around campus. Come on, Bobcats! Come on, Bobcats.
Thank you so much, Amish. Yes, I'll come back.
Hi, Mary Beth. My name is Olivia Gilliand. I'm a first-year journalism student through the A.W. Scripps School of Journalism, and I'm also a news reporter for The Post. And I've recently worked on a couple of stories that have been labeled controversial. You mentioned the diversity scholarship story. I worked on that with my news editor, Donovan Hunt, and my editor-in-chief, Katie Milliard. But I've also done some stories about general fees and investing that's gotten a lot of pushback from the communications department within the university. How do you recommend that journalists go about exercising their First Amendment right when they are receiving pushback from sources or from the institutions that they're writing about?
Well, thank you for that question, Olivia. I'm a fan of The Post and also the magazines and all of the work that you journalists are doing here at Ohio University. And there are groups that can help you with those questions too. The Student Press Law Center gives free legal advice on these issues. Even the ACLU, there's also the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, FIRE, which can be very helpful on these issues as well. But I think I'm going to turn that question over to your director. What do you suggest?
Well, Olivia, we've already had a conversation, but to address that, we're facing two different situations. We can sit up here and talk about our First Amendment rights, but it's one thing to talk about it theoretically. It's different when it's put in practice. What do you do? So as a journalist, typically you're facing deadline pressure. You're doing a story that's newsworthy. The source, in this case, the government, which the university would represent the government, maybe is trying to control the message. They don't want to. They want everything to go through that office. Well, as a journalism professor, I would tell you find a different source. There are other sources out there. You're not limited to just going through a spokesperson. There are other ways to cover that story without being limited by what a particular office tells you on campus.
How does that sound, Olivia? Did you get the articles published? Well, that's good news. I'm glad to hear that. Nice going. Yeah. All right.
Thank you, Olivia.
Hi, my name is Abby Rittenhouse, and I'm a first-year history pre-law student. My question for you is, if the Supreme Court had not ruled in favor of your cause, how do you think that would have impacted how you protested, your view on our government, and your view on being open about speech?
If the Supreme Court had ruled against us, and by the way, that is one of the wonderful things about the case, that we won. Yeah, it's really great. That's why students love this case. I mean, if they're from third grade through middle school, high school, college, law school, because we won. I mean, it's one of those rare times when youth did prevail. But if we hadn't won, I think I would have gone on to speak about different things anyway, because that's how I was raised. And also, I think that some other students would have taken up this, and it probably would have ended up in the Supreme Court. Now, the application of the case to colleges has never been, well, it has been made actually in colleges. When the Supreme Court ruled in favor of us, they said there are two things you cannot do. One, substantially disrupt school with your free speech, and number two, impinge on the rights of others with your free speech. And there were three cases after ours that made even more exceptions. One was Bethel versus Frazier, which said also you cannot advocate your free speech by advocating or using obscenity. And the next one was Hazelwood versus Kuhlmeyer, which was the most damaging. They won at the district level and the appeals level, but lost at the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said that if it's school-sponsored, then the school has more of a right to censor it. Although 17 states have come and passed legislation saying, no, actually, we're going to support our student journalists. Unfortunately, Ohio is not one of those, but there are campaigns going on, student-led campaigns around that. And then the last one was the Morris v. Frederick case, which is also known as the Bong Hits for Jesus case, which says that, I think, I hear some laughter, but the teacher didn't think it was very funny, and neither did the principal, and the kid got suspended, and it went to the Supreme Court where he lost. And the court said that you cannot advocate for illegal drugs with your free speech. And then there was a victory in 2021 with Brandy Levy in Pennsylvania, who had cursed her cheerleading program on Snapchat, and she won at every level. She won at the district, the appeals court, and the Supreme Court. Yeah.
But just
Thank you,
keep in mind that these are cases involving minors, students under the age of 18 who have to go to school, mandatory education, and that's different than college students, in theory.
Thank you, Abby.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Chloe Liggett. I'm a senior, and I'm a Stratcom student. And my question for you is, we see some pretty crazy things in our media right now regarding social media platforms. But in your opinion, what should be the balance between protecting national security interests and upholding free speech rights when it comes to regulating online social media platforms?
What should be the balance between national security and free speech?
Yeah.
What do you think it should be? Do you have an opinion about that?
Well, I personally don't think that we should give one branch of government too much power. Like, I feel like that this was like, so I feel like that with this whole TikTok ban, that like the government's proposing with the Restrict Act, that it happened like pretty swiftly. Like they were able to like move it and put it on the floor pretty quickly. That the people really didn't like get to like have much say in it per se.
Yeah, the
But-
TikTok ban. So you're against it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot
definitely.
of people are against that.
we think that it's for the government to like control and censor what we have to say, which I know we talked about a little bit in class today about how there's a whole lawsuit on whether or not Facebook should be allowed to censor people.
I'm glad you brought that up, because there are 5 cases at the Supreme Court right now involving social media, and 2 of those, one is from Texas and one is from Florida, and they're kind of joined together, and they have to do with whether, how much leeway does government have to censor social media, because, the First Amendment says that Congress cannot censor you. The government cannot censor you, but it doesn't say that a private company can't censor you. So that's an important distinction, but there's a case there right now. And there's another one called Monroe versus Missouri, I believe, which has to do with when during COVID, President Biden was complaining about false information on some social media. And so some people are challenging his right to do that. And so far, it sounds like it has been argued, I think even just this month or last month. And so far, it sounds like the court is pretty receptive to the idea that government should have some say to limit false information on social media. So it's going to be, good to watch those cases. What do you think about that, Dr. Dashell?
Well, I ought to let my students tell, because we did talk about these cases. But there are three different questions that are being asked. One is, can government officials block your social media post if they disagree with your opinion? Can they do that? And I think the U.S. Supreme Court will rule no, they can't. But the question is it a personal social media platform or is it a public social media platform? That's the question. If it's found to be private, then yes, they can, because there's their personal Facebook page. But what about those who have a personal Facebook page, then they decide to run for office, they win, and then they use that platform later on to post official statements and to solicit public comment? So that's the one question. The second question is the one you were referring to, and it's basically, can state governments tell the federal government that it cannot talk to social media platforms and ask them not to publish false facts on their platforms? That reminds me of states' rights versus federal rights. But we won't have a history lesson. And the third question is, can state governments create laws to dictate to social media platforms what they can and cannot put on there? So basically, can the state governments essentially censor social media platforms, telling them that they can't block certain types of information?
And I'm glad you reviewed those. I think there are also cases having to do with whether you would have to prove your age to get a social media account. And I think those are maybe Louise.
There was a law in another, I can't remember the state, don't get me, but Florida, they passed the law saying, trying to keep children off TikTok. So I don't know if someone's filed a lawsuit yet or if that law has passed yet.
Thank you, Chloe.
Yeah.
A little bit off the wall. My name is Warren. Citizens United decision that said basically said money is speech, and that corporations, once again, are people. What do you think about that?
Are corporations people? I say no.
Is money,
Corporations are corporations. People are people. And I'm against the Citizens United, myself personally, but should we be able to talk about these things in school? That is the bottom line. And yes, I think we should be able to talk about these things. No, I don't agree with that decision at all. I think we have way too much money that is corrupting our political decision-making in our country. And if anything, we need to get money out of politics, not more money into it. That's my opinion about it, since you asked.
Thank you, Warren.
My name's Nate, and you said you're not a lawyer. I actually am. So I'm, not necessarily the most emotionally well-adjusted person in the room, and I can speak for a lot of lawyers when I say that. Obviously, the Supreme Court generates a lot of ink, and it has for a number of years. You go from one controversial decision to another. At one point, it was Citizens United. More recently, it's been Dobbs. You could go back historically and find, obviously, a great many others. I'm interested in your thoughts on what it seems to me necessarily has to come before speech, which is, I would use the term reinvigoration or a reversal of a deterioration of a kind of broader civic culture. We need to make sure that people are educated about issues before they speak, because it seems to me that there are a great many people who can develop an opinion on any Supreme Court case. And if you ask many of those people whether they read the decision that they're commenting on before they came to an opinion, I imagine most of them probably didn't. And so I wonder what your thoughts are about making sure, again, that people are informed and about the idea that maybe less than informed speech is perhaps more dangerous to democracy and to the daily practice of democracy than the absence of speech. Thank you.
Well, yes, I do think it's very important to be informed. Usually I don't read the whole ruling, I have to admit. I read the summary. I can't read the whole ruling a lot of times, but yeah, we have to. You read the whole ruling. I knew it. I knew it. But yes, we do have to always be more informed. And civics education, a student the other day was asking me, should civics be mandatory in every school? I think it probably should be. Well, it depends on how it's taught, I guess. Right now we've got the whole, vast difference in how civics is taught too. Because some people are saying, because of our Constitution, we should, not have diversity scholarships. So, it's all, it can be a different interpretation than others. But yeah, I think we should all be informed and read and know about these issues.
But I think that goes back to the Tinker case. I mean, the whole purpose of the Tinker case was to make sure students had First Amendment rights while they were at school, when they're kindergarten through high school, that their First Amendment rights were being protected and they had the freedom to exchange ideas and to, in fact, teach them that the First Amendment exists. I think that's one of the problems, is that it's not being taught in the secondary schools. Students don't know anything about the First Amendment, and so when they're being censored at school, they think it's just normal. And so then they grow up to be senators, principals, U.S. presidents, who seem to think that it's okay to silence other groups of people. But that's, trying to change the dynamic. I wouldn't advocate trying to silence anybody, because the same strategies that are used to silence one group of people, that same strategy can be used to silence me. And
Yes, you're so right. And so much of it is about not being silenced. And sometimes we silence ourselves. I think that's the biggest threat, really, is self-censorship. We censor ourselves before we even have a chance to be, put down or criticized. We just say, oh, we better not say that. Somebody might be upset. So, yeah, self-censorship. But
we'll admit the internet and social media they have changed the rules. Because, the First Amendment was ratified in 1791. They didn't share email drafts. They didn't have a news conference on CNN. So we're operating with the First Amendment that's a lot older than social media, and we're trying to adapt those free speech rights to an entirely new digital environment. And how do we do that? Well, silencing someone isn't the answer.
My name's Lucy. I'm a sophomore. I had a question regarding the other aspect of the First Amendment regarding religion. We see a lot of times, especially now, the separation of church and state. That line is kind of becoming thinner and thinner as we see members of Congress and members of the Supreme Court kind of use the Bible as their backing up for their decision making. I'm just kind of curious to understand your opinion on this.
yes, well, I do believe we have a right to express religion also. And some people felt like it was weighted too far in the other direction, that there should be a limit on religion. And so, I'm in favor. And there have been some important court cases saying that at a college too, I'm trying to remember the name of it, saying that you have a right to religious organizations in a public college. If there are other clubs, you have a right to have a religious club too. And there was a case actually in an elementary school, I think, where kids were passing out candy with religious sayings on it. And the court ruled that as long as they do it in their in-between time between classes, they have every right to do that. So I do believe that there should be a right to religious expression. I am concerned about the vouchers and money from public, funds going to fund private schools where the First Amendment is not in effect. For me, that's an issue as a person who cares about youth rights, because if a lot of money is pushing kids over to private schools where they don't have to follow the First Amendment, then more kids are not going to be covered by the First Amendment. And then a lot of students are going to feel like they better shut up and they better not use their rights and they better not, and I want young people to speak up and use their rights. So it's you're right, you're so right. There is a huge issue going on right now about, religion and what is the proper balance between the Establishment Clause and the Free Expression Clause. So I'm glad that you brought that up. And should we have a right to talk about that, even if it's controversial? Yes, of course. That's the bottom line.
Thank you, Lucy. We have the last question right here.
Hi, Mary Beth. My name is Isabella. I'm a second-year journalism major. I wanted to ask about your opinion. Something that goes kind of hand in hand with free speech and the First Amendment is hate speech. And I was wondering what your thoughts are around the regulation of hate speech and whether that should be included with free speech. Brazil recently outlawed hate speech as a country, entirely. And I just wanted to know your opinions on that.
I think I'm really glad that you brought it up and that you're thinking about it and talking about it, because we need to talk about all that. And there really is no legal definition of hate speech. In the Tinker ruling, it says that you have the limit of your free speech is when you impinge on the rights of others or if there's a substantial disruption. So what is impinging on the rights of others? That's a pretty gray area, and it's been debated ever since. But some speech like Confederate flags I've never seen a case where they've won. Something like a swastika would probably be, censored under that part of the Tinker ruling. And that part of it can, I mean, we know there's a huge debate in colleges right now going on as far as, it's almost a debate between the First Amendment maybe and the 14th Amendment in a way, like equal protection versus the First Amendment, and how far should it go. Sometimes I think it's overdone. I tend to lean towards more the First Amendment because I do believe that we have to be able to talk about things, and you can't just say that, you know, this is going to be censored because it's going to, you know, hurt someone's feelings. I do think the University of Chicago's standard that they've put out as far as triggering is probably a reasonable one, that schools can warn that there might be some issue. Because I'm a trauma nurse. Yeah, if you're going to be triggered by some issue, let's have a way that you don't have to experience that. So they've come out with a pretty good standard, I think. But the whole issue of hate speech is really important, and I think we should really, you know, keep talking about it. And I know that the Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives introduced a bill, I think last week, about what they consider cancel culture, and that, you know, to have more, you know, chance for free speech in some ways that they feel like they've been censored, or the conservative students and faculty have been censored. And I read it over, and it looked, you know, it was interesting. Some of it I thought was kind of reasonable, but it's something that I think we all have to be able to talk about. And there's just one other thing I want to mention too before we leave tonight, which is about journalists in Gaza. And over 100 journalists have been killed in Gaza, and journalists have not been allowed to go into Gaza to cover what is going on there unless they were living there already. So we've got kind of a blackout going on about what's been really going on there in many ways, and thankfully there are lots of other ways that people are learning about the truth of what's going on there. But the Committee to Protect Journalists has published information about all of the horrible things that have happened to journalists, and not just journalists themselves, but sometimes their entire family has been killed in Gaza. So I'm really glad to see, I think the Society of Professional Journalists, the national group, as we were talking about last night, I think they have made a statement, but I want you all to think about that also, especially you journalists, that we have to speak up for journalists all over the world, because it's a very brave profession and it's a very risky profession, but a very, very important one. So thanks to the free press and to journalists who have risked their lives. I know we relied on journalists so much to learn about the Vietnam War, to learn about the Birmingham children, and so much more. And so we always rely on journalists. So I want you all to also remember those journalists and speak up about that and find out more about it. You can check it out, you know, online. Go to the Committee to Protect Journalists and see. The Washington Post also did a whole review of a lot of the journalists that have been killed or mistreated in Gaza. So anyway, thank you all so much for having me here tonight. Do we have any final words?
Oh no, I'm good. The First Amendment only works if you work it.
Only works if you work it. So work it, people. So glad you came out tonight. We're going to keep working it, right? I knew you'd say that.
I don't know about you, but it is so cool to be talking about the Tinker case with Tinker sitting right here. One more round of applause.
Thank you for including me.
Again, we want to thank Andrew Logan and the Rivada Foundation. And we want to thank Jim and Joan Weymouth because their son made this possible.